Hi, I'm Adam and welcome back, and today we're talking lenses, which are my all-time favourites, how those focal lengths can be useful and what you might use them for. And if you stick around until the end, there's also a secret number 6. Let's go. Before we get going today though, this video is sponsored by MPB. If you want to buy, sell or trade your photography gear, do it with MPB. It's often said that good glass is the most important part of your photography gear, but it's also important to have the right lenses with the most practical focal length to suit your needs and in a price bracket you can afford. So here we are going to cover a range of lenses in a range of genres, and I'll share what focal lengths I use for different subjects. I'm a Canon guy though, so don't expect me to stray far from that, but nearly all of this applies to other camera bodies as well. Now this week confirmed to me that there is something a bit different in the head of wildlife photographers. I was with Tom Mason, who is a fantastic wildlife photographer with incredible fieldcraft. But I find the skill required, the persistence, patience, and ability to cope with constant disappointment is almost overwhelming. We spent all of Monday and Tuesday walking miles up and down a river trying to photograph some otters, but we didn't see a single one. It's absolutely brutal and not something I'm used to. I hope to bring you that story one day soon. However, I did have with me this Canon RF 100-500 lens, which has become an instant favourite. For years, on the few occasions that I did do wildlife photography, I've always used this Canon 400mm prime. It's a lovely, affordable lens, but as a landscape photographer, carrying it around all the time is just not practical. It's too heavy and too bulky. But with this Canon RF 100-500, I found it to be much more versatile, and it's perfect for those wanting to be ready for any nature photography opportunity. I normally carry a 70-200 with me, but I could ditch that and instead have this with me, which extends my range all the way up to 500mm, so I'm always ready for those surprise animal encounters. It's not a cheap lens by any means, but it comes in at a fraction of the cost of a new 500mm prime lens. There is a compromise though, and that really comes in the size of the aperture. This has an aperture range of f4.5 to 7.1, so when you're at 500mm, f7.1 is the biggest possible aperture, so bright conditions will be your friend. But I found with the Canon R5, which handles noise very well, you can crank the ISO up pretty high and still get very good results. This wagtail was probably my best effort from the other day. This is shot at ISO 2500, and I think it still looks pretty clean. Coupled with the R5, the focusing was incredibly fast and more accurate pretty much than anything I've ever used before. And I was also incredibly impressed with the image stabilization. This footage here was shot handheld at 500mm, and I think it looks great and is more than usable. It's also a reasonable size and weighs just a tiny bit more than the older EF 70-200 2.8. So yeah, a great lens. Next up, we have this 85mm prime, and we enter into a much more affordable region where we can buy this lens for around £200. There is something really special about prime lenses generally because they introduce certain restrictions, and I find this can often increase creativity. But this is not a lens for everyone. Its minimum focus distance is pretty large. It isn't the most robust build in the world. It's a bit plasticky. And 85mm is actually too long for many situations, especially if you're using a cropped sensor. I've used it successfully for landscape images, but where I think it really shines is for portraits. At f1.8 with that big fat aperture, it just gives this dreamy quality to the background blur, which is enhanced even more by that 85mm focal length. The characteristics I love about this lens I actually find really difficult to convey, and it's very possible I'm biased because I use this lens so much to photograph my children when they were young. It is absolutely perfect for portraits as well, because you don't have to be right up in people's faces with that slightly longer focal length. And because of that big fat aperture, the images are always nice and bright, even in dingy conditions. And if the background is also quite boring that you can just blow it out into that nice, creamy bokeh, and you're still left with some very lovely images. To be honest though, I don't use this much anymore, and I probably will sell it to recoup some cash at some point, but it's always going to hold a very special place in my heart and is absolutely an all-time favourite. Now I am cheating a bit with this next one, because I'm including the 3 lenses that make up the Holy Trinity: the 15-35, the 24-70, and the 70-200. And I'm specifically talking about the Canon RF versions of these lenses here. I don't actually own these lenses yet, but have used them quite a few times now. And they are undoubtedly amongst the best lenses I've ever used. Once I get these lenses, I almost feel like I'll never need to buy a lens ever again. I think they're that good. But the focal range covered by any Holy Trinity makes up at least 95% of all the pictures I've ever made. It's what I carry with me every time I go out, and it does absolutely everything I need for both stills and for video. Also, whenever anyone asks, if you can only have one lens, what would it be? My immediate answer to that is always a 24-70. Funnily enough though, as a landscape photographer, if I could only have 2 lenses, I would go with the 15-35 and the 70-200, because these 2 lenses cover the majority of what I like to shoot. These Canon RF lenses are just fantastic though, and I describe them as pretty much flawless. They're fully weather sealed, as shown here. The image quality is fantastic, and the build quality is second to none. I think when I do eventually buy them though, I'll get the f4 version of the 70-200. I don't shoot weddings anymore, and for landscapes I just don't need that an aperture bigger than f4, and that means I can save a good chunk of money for my wallet and a good bit of weight for my back. Now, all the lenses featured in today's video can be found at MPB by using the links below, and they are the sponsors of today's video, and it's the best place if you want to buy, sell, or trade your photography gear. Very soon in here, I'm going to be seriously streamlining my setup, and I'll be using MPB to sell a lot of my gear, the things I no longer need. And the main reason I use them is it's just so easy to do and takes all the faff out of selling gear that I usually experience. A little while ago, I realized I hadn't used this 17-40mm lens for a good couple of years. So I just went onto MPB, hit the start selling button, typed in what I wanted to sell, and told them the condition that I thought it was in. MPB immediately then gave me a quote that I was happy with, and then provided me with a shipping label so I can send it to them fully insured for free, or alternatively, they'll even come and collect it from you. I then just boxed it up, shipped it to them, and a couple of days later, I received an email to say that the lens had been checked and that they agreed with the excellent condition that I said it was in. Then all I had to do was give them my bank details, and a short time later, the money then appeared in my account. I was blown away by the service, and it's just the best place to buy, sell, or trade your photography or video gear. And all the lenses featured in today's video are available on MPB via the links down below, so give them some love for sponsoring this channel. Next up, we have this macro lens. It could be any dedicated 100mm macro lens really, but in my case it's this Canon f2.8 macro L lens. If you've been watching this channel for long enough, you'll know that I absolutely love macro photography, and it's really because of this lens that this channel took off in the first place with my first video on water drops. It's also thanks to this that I won the first British Photography Awards, and it also kept my photography spirits alive during the lockdowns and stuff. Macro photography just opens up a whole new world of creative opportunities. And if you want to learn a bit more about it, you can hit the link down below to visit the Raw Room, where you can now take my water drop photography masterclass or my intro to macro course. And it's all now available to access without ads or subscriptions. So hit that link down below and check out the Raw Room and learn some more photography. If there's one lens that every photographer should own at some point in their photography journey, then it's very difficult to argue against the Nifty 50. That being the cheapest 50mm lens that money can buy. In my case, it's this Canon EF 50mm STM, but these things are affordable, fun, and versatile. 50mm has a field of view very similar to our eyes, so it's a lens that suits just about every genre of photography. And if you can't be creative with a lens like this, you might have a bit of a problem. The first time you open up that aperture all the way to f1.8 and see that blurry background appear, it's just extremely addictive, and it's hard really not to overuse it. I love that lens because it's cheap, it's light, and when you strap it to your camera like this, your big DSLR or mirrorless body, suddenly it becomes light and inconspicuous. It's a great focal length for portraits, and I used to use this and the older f1.4 I had just as a walk-around lens. Again, having that restriction of the prime lens makes us more creative, forces that classic idea of kind of zooming with your feet. They don't provide the best image quality in the world, and often fairly cheaply made. They might have minimal aperture blades, which means that the bokeh balls aren't always going to be perfectly rounded, but none of that really matters. It's just a fun lens for every day. Pretty much every indoor video thumbnail I make uses this lens. And if you attach some cheap macro tubes to it as well, you also then have a very effective macro lens. Impossible to leave this one out, the Nifty 50. Now, it's not lost on me that some of the lenses in this list are very expensive. However, many amateurs and professionals alike don't think twice about dropping $2,000 on a lens, or even $4,000 on a new camera body every 5 years. But when I recommend they drop around $400 on something that will improve their photography more than anything else, and more than any lens, they look at me like I'm mad. Now, I'm not actually talking about a lens here. I am, of course, talking about a printer. Bringing your work back into the physical world as a photographer is about the most satisfying thing you can do. The reason many people are put off printing at home, though, is because there is an ongoing cost. But this is no different to any other art form where we use consumables. Painters need brushes, canvas, and paint, where we need ink and paper. Sell a lens or purchase one less, and that will fund what will undoubtedly become a printing habit for a good few years. I've made loads of printing videos now, so check them out, get inspired, hit the link below to check out the lenses, and I'll see you on another one very, very soon. Bye.